They think silence is weakness, that if you don't speak, you don't know, that if you don't react, you don't feel. But what they don't realize is that silence is a weapon. And in your hands, it can become the sharpest blade, because the most dangerous person in the room is the one who observes, who calculates, who waits. You've been told that power comes from speaking up, from showing confidence, from being louder, faster, more aggressive. But Nietzsche didn't believe that. Nietzsche believed that the man who can master himself completely can manipulate reality without ever raising his voice. And if you understand what I'm about to show you, you will never be underestimated again. You'll no longer need to prove your worth. You'll radiate it. You won't need to fight for respect. People will sense it. Because when you walk into a room and say nothing, but everyone feels you, that's when you've won the game. But here's the truth most people can't handle. If you don't master this, you will be prey. You will be tricked by smiles. You will be baited into conflict you can't win. You'll keep explaining yourself to people who've already decided to disrespect you. And slowly, piece by piece, they'll take your power. So listen carefully. What I'm about to give you is not motivational fluff. It's not communication tips. This is psychological warfare. Elegant, silent, ruthless, Nietzschean. And it begins with your eyes. You see, the eyes are not just for looking. They are for framing the world. And Nietzsche said, all things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power, not truth. Let that sink in. That it's not truth that dominates the world. It's perception. And the one who controls perception wins. You don't do this by speaking louder. You do it by holding your gaze, not erratic, not threatening, but still. A gaze that doesn't wander, a gaze that doesn't beg, a gaze that sees without revealing what it sees. Because the moment someone can read your eyes, they know your game. But when your eyes are unreadable, they start projecting. They wonder what you know, what you're thinking, if you're judging them. And suddenly they become self-conscious. They start explaining themselves. They seek your approval. That's when the balance of power shifts. You haven't said a word, and they're already bending. Now imagine this. You're at a table with 5 people, all talking, all posturing. You say nothing, you just watch. Calm, poised, patient. At first, they think you're shy. Then they wonder if you're arrogant. Then they start performing for your attention. Why? Because silence is a mirror, and people can't stand to look into it without seeing themselves. They need feedback. They need validation. They need noise. But you are the void. And that makes you terrifying. But only if you have mastered the second law of silent dominance. Stillness of body. Your posture is your kingdom. Nietzsche believed that the will to power isn't about dominating others. It's about dominating the self, the body, the instincts, the impulse to twitch, react, shrink, defend. He wrote, he who cannot command himself should obey. So let me ask you, when someone insults you, do you flinch? When someone disagrees, do you frown? When someone questions you, do you defend? Because if you do, they've already won. You have given them proof that their words have power over your nervous system, that they can move you. But when your body doesn't move, when your expression is neutral, unfazed, when your breathing remains slow, your shoulders squared, your presence still, they feel powerless. Not because you attacked, but because you didn't. Your lack of response is a verdict. It says, you are not important enough to move me. And that cuts deeper than any insult. Think of the greats. Julius Caesar, Bruce Lee, Michael Corleone. All different men, but all masters of this presence. Not just silent, but still. It's the stillness that unsettles people. Because most humans live in emotional chaos. They are ruled by impulse, expression, nervous laughter, defensive chatter. So when they meet someone who has no leaks, they either worship him or fear him. and both are forms of control. But here's the twist Nietzsche never said out loud, and maybe couldn't. Stillness, silence. They're not tactics, they're consequences. Consequences of inner mastery. Because you cannot fake this, you cannot pretend not to be affected while trembling inside. You must become the kind of person who is truly unshaken. You must train your mind like a blade. You must learn how to let people misunderstand you without needing to correct them. You must endure being underestimated without rushing to prove them wrong. Because the moment you react, you reveal your hunger, and power is a game of concealment, of patience, of slow-burning dominance. That's why Nietzsche was feared. Not for what he said, but for what he saw, for the terrifying clarity he carried in silence. So ask yourself, do people feel uneasy when you're quiet? Do they try to fill the space you leave? Do they feel like you're watching more than they are? If the answer is no, you're not yet dangerous. But if the answer is yes, you're on the path of the strategist, the predator who doesn't chase, the man who bends reality without saying a word. But this is just the beginning, because the next phase, it's not about being silent, it's about bending others through silence, through invisible signals, through a kind of dominance so subtle they don't even know they've lost. But they have, and by the time they realize, you're already 10 moves ahead. They think they're in control, they speak confidently, walk with swagger, throw their weight into every conversation. But what they don't realize is that every word they say, every gesture, every attempt to dominate reveals them, and you are collecting data, not with pen and paper, but with presence, with silence, with patience. Because the quietest person in the room is the only one listening. And in a world where everyone wants to speak, the listener becomes the king. Nietzsche once said, "He who fights with monsters should see to it that he himself does not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you." But what if you are the abyss? What if your silence is so deep, so consuming, that others fall into it and reveal everything? That's where the third layer of silent domination begins. The art of invisible interrogation. You don't ask, you observe. You don't dig, you bait. You don't pressure, you let them unravel themselves. You see, most people are dying to be seen. They crave recognition, approval, a moment to shine, and the moment they sense a pair of eyes locked in, silent, steady, respectful, they start confessing. It begins with a harmless story, then a childhood wound, then a betrayal, and before they know it, they've handed you the map to their soul. Not because you forced them, but because you gave them space. You made silence feel safe, but inside that silence was your blade. Every word they speak, you categorize. Every insecurity, you store. Every contradiction, you mark. And when the time comes to strike, you'll know exactly where to aim. This is how empires were built. Not through brute force, but through information. And the best information comes when you let them speak while you disappear. But here's the trap most fall into. They listen, but they show too much. Nods, smiles, raised eyebrows, verbal affirmations. All of these are reactions. All of them leak power. What you must master instead is the deadpan read, and no matter what they say, praise, confession, insult, threat, your face must remain unreadable, like a mirror that reflects, but does not absorb. This is what Nietzsche called noble indifference. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you choose what affects you. And that choice is terrifying to people who are ruled by their emotions. But let's go even deeper, because silence alone isn't enough. Stillness alone isn't enough. If you want to truly outsmart someone without ever speaking, you must master the dark art of presence shifting. It's the ability to feel bigger than you are, not in ego, not in volume, but in weight. When you walk into a room and people glance up without knowing why, when someone senses you behind them before they see you, When a conversation shifts tone the moment you enter the circle, and no one can explain what just happened. That is presence, and it comes from two things: ruthless self-command, the ability to radiate tension without releasing it. Let me explain. Most people leak energy. Their gestures are loose. Their movements spill out into space. Their emotions bounce off the walls. But when you compress yourself, when your movements are precise, when your breathing is slow, anchored, you start to contain energy. And the human body is a radar. It feels when someone is holding power versus when someone is bleeding it. The tension you carry becomes gravity, and people are drawn to it. But there's more. Nietzsche once wrote, "There is an old illusion. It is called good and evil." That illusion is what most people live by. They believe that if they're good, kind, agreeable, they'll be accepted, respected, included. And maybe once upon a time that was true. But not anymore, because the modern world rewards control, mystery, force of presence. You cannot afford to be obvious. You cannot afford to be emotionally transparent, because the moment they know what matters to you, they own you. So what do? You invert the game. You stop trying to be liked. You stop trying to be clear. You become an enigma. You let people guess your past. You let them wonder what drives you. You let them project their own fantasies or fears onto you. And the more silent you are, the louder their imagination becomes. They will fear you or follow. You or both. Now look at history. Why did everyone follow Napoleon? Why did soldiers die for Alexander? Why did enemies tremble before Marcus Aurelius? It wasn't just the sword. It was the invisible weight they carried. They were silent, but you felt them. They didn't scream, they watched. And when they finally spoke, the world stopped to listen. You must become that. Not loud, not desperate, not eager to be heard, but inevitable. Because when you hold yourself like the outcome is already decided, people believe you. And when you believe it, it becomes true. But here's the paradox Nietzsche understood, and only a few can handle. To be truly untouchable, you must become deeply self-aware. You must know what you fear and make peace with it. You must know your desires and discipline them. You must study your triggers and neutralize them, because the real enemy is not outside, it's inside. The part of you that needs validation, the part that flares up when insulted, the part that reacts when challenged. That's where you lose. That's where power leaks. But if you conquer that, you can sit in a room with your enemy, smile faintly, say nothing, and win, because they'll exhaust themselves, trying to move you, trying to shake you, trying to make you blink. And when they fail, they'll kneel, not because you forced them, but because you never needed them. And that, my friend, is true dominance. Not shown, not spoken, but felt. You're not just playing the game anymore. You're becoming the board. And they're just the pieces. They won't see it coming, because they've been taught to chase status, speak louder, and throw their opinions like punches. But you don't need noise. You are the silence that ends all arguments. This is where the game changes, where you stop reacting and start engineering, where you don't just outsmart someone, you reshape their perception of reality. Because here's the most dangerous truth Nietzsche whispered between the lines. There are no facts, only interpretations. That's not philosophy. That's psychological warfare. You see, the person who controls the frame controls the outcome. You walk into a room, and everyone has their version of the truth. But if your presence is more grounded, if your silence carries more conviction than their words, they begin to doubt themselves. Not because you argued better, but because you looked like you didn't need to argue at all. That's what Nietzsche meant when he said, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow." When your purpose is forged in silence, your energy becomes unshakable. But most people don't have that. They talk because they're lost. They over-explain because they're unsure. They insult because they're insecure. They dominate conversations because they can't dominate themselves. But you're no longer playing their game. Because here's the next level: psychological asymmetry. While they act out emotions, you calculate. While they posture, you position. While they rush to speak, you study timing like a sniper. Because timing is everything. Speak too soon and you look desperate. Speak too late and you look passive. But speak once with weight. After measured silence, you don't just speak, you collapse the room. Let me show you what this looks like in action. Think of Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated samurai who never lost a duel. He didn't win with brute strength. He won with timing. He'd let opponents overextend, swing wildly, exhaust themselves. Then, one movement. Precise. Final. The sword moved once. The fight was over. You must become that. Not just with words, but with decisions. With your movements. Your eyes. Your walk. Your pauses. When you speak, it should feel like Judgment Day. Not rage. Not passion. Certainty. Because when you radiate that, even your silence becomes law. But here's the twist Nietzsche wanted you to see. This kind of power doesn't just come from understanding others. It comes from dismantling yourself. You have to unlearn the need to be liked. You have to kill the part of you that wants to explain. You have to crucify your inner child who still begs to be understood. Because the moment you stop needing anything from anyone, you become dangerous. Not because you wish them harm, but because you can walk away from anything. A lie, a betrayal, an empire. That's what people fear the most. The man who cannot be trapped. The woman who doesn't flinch. The soul that stands alone, that is unbreakable presence. And it only comes from embracing a brutal truth. You are all you need. Not in arrogance. In self-command. Nietzsche called this the Übermensch, the overman. Not someone above others, but someone who has overcome himself. Let that sink in. That you're not trying to win arguments anymore. You're not trying to look strong. You're sculpting your inner world into a fortress, where no insult can reach you, where no manipulation can enter, where no praise can seduce you. And from that place, you don't just outsmart people. You become inevitable. Because you don't compete in their drama. You dissolve it. Now let me show you the emotional shift. There will come a moment, quiet, subtle, when someone tries to provoke you. They'll say something calculated. A jab, a threat, a humiliation. Most people take the bait. They defend themselves, get angry, lose control. But not you. You look at them. No reaction, no smile, no tension. Just stillness. And in that stillness, they'll feel something horrifying. Their words had no power. They missed. It's like throwing a dagger into the ocean. No splash. No echo. Just swallowed. And from that moment on, you're untouchable. Because you've proven, without speaking, that their reality doesn't bend yours. You've made them feel small by being vast. You've defeated them without ever moving. And here's the deeper revelation. This is not about being cold. This is not about becoming cruel. It's about becoming whole. You don't silence yourself to suppress pain. You silence yourself to hear it. You don't walk alone because you hate people. You walk alone because most can't walk beside your fire. You don't avoid conflict because you fear it. You avoid it because it's a waste of precision. This is the transformation Nietzsche offered, buried beneath layers of metaphor. When you become rooted in your own values, when you live by your own code, when your silence says more than their screams, you are no longer prey. You are the strategist, the mirror, the abyss they can't survive, and they'll feel it. Every time you enter the room, say nothing, and somehow still win. It starts with a glance. No words. No shift in tone. Just a look that says, I see more than you think. I know more than I show. I need less than you assume. That's the silent weapon Nietzsche handed to those willing to pay the price. Because true power never screams. It whispers. It waits, and when it moves, it's already too late. You've now stepped into that realm. You are no longer just someone trying to survive the noise. You've become the architect of silence. But let's go deeper, because this final truth isn't pretty. People don't fear the loud ones. They expect noise, They fear the ones who observe, the ones who don't flinch, the ones who can take every insult, every manipulation, every lie, and respond with nothing but a calm, unreadable stare. Why? Because that stare says, I've already seen the end of this game. You're not reactive anymore. You're predictive. You don't respond to pressure. You generate it. That is the final transformation Nietzsche wanted you to undergo. You don't just learn to outsmart others, you learn to detach from the need to be seen. That's the paradox. The less you speak, the more they wonder. The less you reveal, the more they chase. The less you react, the more they panic. And here's where it all connects. Every room has a dominant force. It's not the one who talks the most, it's the one who can leave at any time. That's the leverage silence gives you. You walk away, and the room collapses, because they weren't addicted to your approval. They were addicted to your stillness. Your control. Your mystery. You became the axis everything spun around, and they didn't even know it until you were gone. And that's when they finally understand. The one who speaks least rules the frame. The one who appears last shifts the power. The one who needs nothing cannot be owned. Let's rewind. You came into this world loud, crying, demanding, trying to be heard. But now, you've become something else, something fewer than 1% ever become. You've become deliberate. Every word is a weapon. Every silence is a stance. Every moment is a test, and you're the one administering it. And now the world feels it. They don't know why they defer to you. They don't know why they shrink in your presence. They just know something about you doesn't bend. You've become the one Nietzsche pointed to with a smirk when he said, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. Because the tribe wants noise. It wants conformity. It wants permission to stay weak. But you've walked out of the circle. You've broken the pattern. You've chosen the hard road and forged something they'll never understand. True inner command. Let me show you how it ends. Not in a battle. Not in a dramatic confrontation. But in a moment of unshakable presence. You walk into the same rooms. You hear the same gossip. You feel the same pressure. But now it doesn't touch you. Because your mind is sharp, your emotions are steel, and your purpose is not up for negotiation. That is Nietzsche's final, forbidden lesson. Master yourself in silence, and the world will move to your rhythm. This isn't charisma. It's conviction. This isn't manipulation. It's precision. This isn't arrogance. It's awareness. So now I leave you with one final truth. You've been given something few people will ever possess. Not a tactic. Not a trick. But a way of being. A psychological edge forged in silence, sharpened by presence, and activated by nothing more than your decision to stay still. When everyone else flinches, use it, not to hurt, but to reveal, not to dominate, but to rise, not to silence others, but to listen so deeply they expose themselves without knowing it. And when you do, you will never need to outtalk anyone again, because you will have already outlived them in the one space they never mastered. Stillness. So if this resonated, if your blood shifted, if your mind locked in, then it's time. Like this video, comment below with one word, stillness. Let them wonder what it means. And subscribe, because this channel isn't just entertainment. It's the training ground for the mentally elite. Those who see behind the mask. Those who walk alone. Those who command the room without ever speaking. I'll see you in the next video. But remember, the most powerful move you'll ever make is the one you didn't show.